All right, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone. This is the Coastal Sharks Management Board. We'll begin by going through and getting an approval of the agenda that we have before us. I'll just note that all of the items that are here, they're intended to be in the specific order, except on item number 4, we are going to change the order of the bullet points. We'll do the Amendment 9 proposed rule presentation first, and then move into Amendment 6 and the 2016 specifications. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Is there any objection to accepting the agenda as written? Okay, seeing none, the agenda will stand approved. Next order of business is to approve the proceedings from our last board meeting, November of 2014. Are there any comments or changes to those proceedings? Seeing none, we will see those as accepted. Next order of business will be public comment. We had one individual signed up who has subsequently indicated his needs have been addressed. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. Is there anyone else that would like to comment on an item that is not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will move right along. Okay, so our next order of business will be to get an update from NOAA, and I'll turn the presentation over to Carol, and again, we'll start with the Amendment 9 proposed rule presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, everyone. My name is Carol Brewster-Geis. I work for the Highland Migratory Species Management Division of NOAA Fisheries. Next slide. And I'm going to give an update on all 3 of our most recent shark rules. So next slide. Starting with Amendment 9. This rule was a proposed rule back in August of 2014. And next slide. It has gone through a lot since we started trying to manage smooth dogfish and the other smoothhound sharks. So we started back in 2010, where we finalized measures to bring smooth dogfish under federal management. Lots of hiccups along the way. Last year we released the draft Amendment 9 and proposed rule, and this has to do with smooth dogfish, Florida smoothhound, and Gulf smoothhound. At the same time, we had a stock assessment going underway for all of those 3 species. That stock assessment finished last March. We made a final determination in June, and we are hoping, fingers crossed, knocking on lots of wood, to finalize this amendment in the next couple of weeks. So next slide. The proposed measures, these were proposed, are on the slide in front of you. They were to establish an effective date for the regulations we had finalized in Amendment 3, along with the subsequent trawl rule, and also implement the smooth dogfish specific provisions in the Shark Conservation Act. The Shark Conservation Act, if you remember, required fins be naturally attached on all sharks, with an exception for smooth dogfish, and specifically smooth dogfish. In looking at the savings clause in the Shark Conservation Act, we saw that there were 5 provisions, 2 of which we didn't feel were open to interpretation. Those were 12% fin to carcass ratio and within 50 nautical miles. But 3 of them we felt were open to interpretation, and we did propose a 75% catch composition along with no other sharks on board. So if you wanted to remove smooth dogfish fins at sea, you would need to make sure that 75% of your catch was smooth dogfish and that no other sharks were on board. We also felt that the state permits part of the savings clause was up to interpretation, and we proposed that all states would generally just need to have a permit that allowed for smooth dogfish to be landed, not a specific smooth dogfish permit. And then geographic applicability, the Act said Maine through Florida. Florida has an east and west coast. In the stock assessment, they found that along the east coast, it smooth dogfish was the primary species. You were very unlikely to catch either Florida or Gulf smoothhound, whereas in the Gulf of Mexico, you could catch all three of those species and it would be very difficult to tell them apart. Because the act was specific to smooth dogfish, we proposed limiting the scope of it to the east coast of Florida along all the way up to Maine. So you would need to meet all 5 of those provisions in order to remove smooth dogfish fins at sea. You could still fish for smooth dogfish commercially, you would just have to leave the fins naturally attached. Again, that is what we proposed. This is not final. That was proposed. We also proposed implementing smooth dogfish or smoothhound shark quotas based on more recent landings information. So what we proposed was based on landings. We did have an alternative to consider the stock assessment, but at the time we proposed this, the stock assessment was not complete. And then we had 2 sets of alternatives regarding gillnet, sink and drift gillnet, and soak time versus net checks, along with a alternative to change where you needed a vessel monitoring system if you had gillnet gear on board. So next slide. We received over 500 comments, written comments on this rule. There was a lot of mixed support and opposition to what I just went through. By far, the majority of the comments had to do with 3 measures: the quota, the catch composition, and the no other sharks on board. Specifically, almost everybody supported moving forward with a quota that was based on the stock assessment. Very few people supported a 75% catch composition. A lot of states and councils suggested moving that down to 25% catch composition. They felt 75% would cause too many dead discards. And no other sharks on board. Again, very few people, if anyone, supported that part of what we proposed. Most people felt that spiny dogfish and pelagic sharks were actually a big proponent or a big part of the smooth dogfish catch for those directed smooth dogfish trips. So we are in the process of working on the final rule. As I said, I'm hoping, really hoping it will be out in the next couple weeks. In the meantime, next slide, we do have the stock assessment. So that was finalized in March. We've released our status determination in June of not overfished, not experiencing overfishing, and this is specific for the Atlantic smooth dogfish. The stock assessment said that in the Atlantic, the total allowable catch could be 550,000 sharks, and just for a frame of reference, the 2012 commercial catch was just over 400,000 sharks. So next slide, our timing coming very, very, very close. So it would be publishing soon, effective early next year. It wouldn't be effective right away because we are going to be implementing permitting requirements. So everybody who's fishing for smooth dogfish or in the Gulf, the other smoothhounds would need to have a fishing permit, and we want to give time for people to have those permits before the rule goes into effect. So it would be sometime early 2016 if all goes well. And the observer requirements and the smooth dogfish provisions of the Shark Conservation Act, all of that would go into effect at the same time. So the last thing on this, in our preparation to implement this rule, we went and we looked at how many people already had permits. In this board, as you know, anybody who is purchasing sharks, each state needed to require that they have a federal shark dealer permit. So we went looking to see how many people have been reporting voluntarily at this point smooth dogfish, and we found that there were a number of dealers throughout the Atlantic that did not have a federal dealer permit. We let ASMFC know. Ashton sent out that information a couple weeks ago. As a result, and to make sure that all the dealers along the East Coast could attend a dealer shark identification workshop, this is required in order to get the dealer permit, we have added in another dealer workshop. So we have the 2 previously scheduled ones in South Carolina and Florida and then we added another one in New York. So if you do have any dealers in your states that want to purchase smooth dogfish, they need to attend one of these workshops before they can get a federal dealer permit. And once Amendment 9 is finalized and implemented federally, we will be looking at that and could be taking enforcement action if they do not have it. And that's it for Amendment 9. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I will go ahead and take any questions you have on the presentation. We also have up at the front to my left Captain Doug Messick to address any law enforcement concerns that we have here as well. So questions for Carol. Rob O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Carol. And I guess my question concerns the permitting. It's almost as if I heard two different things, and I'm sure that's just my hearing. But the first time around, and in the document, it talks about holding a state commercial permit valid for smooth dogfish, and it almost sounded to me as if that could be generic or a general permit. So, for example, if a state has a permit for fishermen that if they sell it all, no matter what the species is, they would be covered. But then later on, as you went through the slides and talked about early 2016, it seems more that the harvester and the dealer or buyer are going to need a specialized permit, especially the dealer. You made that pretty clear. So am I on the wrong course here asking about the permit? So what do you have for us?
So with Amendment 9, we'll be implementing two permits. One for fishermen, that if they want to land smooth dogfish and sell them commercially, they'll need to have a federal permit. If they want to remove the fins at sea, part of the Shark Savings Clause, what we proposed was that they would also need to have a state permit that allows for the landing of smooth dogfish. For the dealers, once Amendment 9 goes final, dealers who are purchasing smooth dogfish from fishermen will need to have a federal dealer permit. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I'm back to the harvester. The harvester, if you have 75% of the harvest is smooth dogfish and there are no sharks and there can be finning, for the state requirement, is that or is that not going to be a specialized permit for the harvester? Or will the state rule on being able to harvest and sell apply? So I hate to ask you twice, but thank you.
It's okay. So we looked at two different alternatives. One was requiring a smooth dogfish specific state permit, and one was looking at just a state general commercial permit. What we've proposed was a state general commercial permit, and almost all of the comments were in agreement with that.
Any other questions on Amendment 9? Tom Baum, and then Lou Daniels.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, Carol, continuing with the state permit. So right now, our fishermen, they would have the appropriate state gear license. And does that qualify?
Under what we proposed, yes.
Thank you.
Dr. Daniel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hey, Carol. Just I guess a concern about the 75%. I mean, most of our guys are fishing smooth dogfish, and that's all they have. So that's not a problem. I don't understand why, though, if they have a small coastal or a large coastal as bycatch and they've got the appropriate permits, what the reasoning is for not allowing those other sharks because of the identification. If it's an identification issue, it would seem pretty simple to distinguish between a core of a smooth dog and a fins attached large coastal as long as you had the fins attached. So I'm trying to figure out the justification for them having to throw those fish back dead.
So once again, those were the proposed measures. They aren't final. We had very little support. I don't think we had any support for the no other sharks on board. What we were trying to do in that, along with the 75%, was to meet the language in the Shark Conservation Act itself, which noted it was directed fishing on smooth dogfish. So we were trying to, how do you define that? And that's where that came from, that proposal.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Moving forward, we'll go on to the next presentation for the Amendment 6 final rule, and then after that we'll have another presentation on the proposed specs for 2016. Before we get into the proposed specs, I'll also give a brief overview of some ways forward that staff sees us for moving forward, so we'll be able to set that background. Go ahead, Carol.
Thanks. So Amendment 6, this had to do with the shark fisheries overall, mainly the commercial shark fisheries, so it didn't really have anything to do with the recreational. So next slide. Our purpose and need for this was to try to come up with more flexible management measures to address some of the issues in the commercial shark fishery. So some of the specific objectives in Amendment 6 were to increase the efficiency in the large and small coastal shark fisheries, promote economic viability throughout the fisheries, obtain optimum yield, and then also continue to rebuild overfished shark stocks, along with prevent overfishing. So next slide. So this rule went final and effective in August of this year. The overall changes, the overall changes had to do with both the Atlantic and the Gulf. One of the things we did was to change the retention limit for directed shark permit holders for large coastal sharks from 36 to a default limit of 45 large coastal sharks per trip with a maximum of 55. So what this means is we have the flexibility to change the retention limit anywhere from 0 to 55 throughout the season, and based on public comment, that is what a lot of people really wanted us to do. We also removed upgrading restrictions for all the limited access permit holders, so they won't have to worry about their length overall or hold space or anything like that. They're removed for the shark permits. They still are in place for the swordfish permits if you have anybody who's interested in that. For the Atlantic specifically, we did not implement any sub-regional quotas. If you remember, we did propose some for large and small coastal sharks. There were a lot of questions from everybody on what the numbers, where the numbers came from, how would we adjust, would we be limited to those numbers forevermore? And a lot of people instead preferred the idea of us toggling the large coastal shark limit back and forth through the season to make sure that all fishermen fishing for large coastal sharks from Florida, North Carolina, north of that, had that opportunity to fish. Small coastal sharks, it was a slightly different matter. We did increase the non-black-nosed small coastal shark quota up to 264 metric tons. This is up from about 176, I think it was before. So it was a large increase. And this is the Atlantic-wide non-black-nosed small coastal shark quota. Black-nosed sharks was a different story. If you remember, black-nosed sharks and non-black-nosed small coastal sharks are linked. So if one is caught, both of them close. We implemented a management boundary at 34 degrees north latitude. That's about Wilmington, North Carolina. Anything north of that, anyone north of that cannot land black-nosed sharks. Remember, this is commercial, it's not recreational. So anyone north of 34 degrees can no longer land black-nosed sharks. They can continue fishing for the non-black-nosed small coastal sharks, even if the black-nosed quota is caught and landed. So in August, we actually reopened the non-black-nosed small coastal fishery north of 34 degrees. South of 34 degrees, once the black-nose quota is caught, both non-black-nose and black-nose close together. Since implementing Amendment 6, we've had a lot of comments from people, particularly Menhaden fishermen south of 34 degrees, who really want us to look at that again and maybe set up a trip limit for black-nose, so we are actively looking into that. The next slide shows everything I just said in map format for small coastal sharks. And that is it for Amendment 6.
Thank you very much, Carol. Any questions? Again, this was a final rule, became effective in August of this year. Questions? Dr. Daniel.
Question on the black nose, Carol. We see a lot of black nose north of the 34 degree line, but we don't really seem to catch a lot of them. There tend to be more inshore and shallow water. But so I don't know why we haven't historically landed them. But I'm just curious as to where we are with an updated black nose assessment, and when we might be able to provide some relief north of 34. I mean, I appreciate what y'all did with Amendment 6. I think that there was a lot of help there, especially for our guys north of 34 to be able to catch the sharp-nosed sharks. But if you can give me some hand on when we might see something on black nose, that would be good.
So we don't have a black nose on the schedule yet. I will say that historically, one of the reasons why we removed black nose from north of 34 degrees is the landing's less than a metric ton on average. So it's very small. The very last slide, the whole presentation. Oh, yep. Brought extra slides in case we had the questions. So we don't have black nose on the assessment list. We do have potential, there we go, that one. So this is the upcoming schedule for shark assessments. We had blue sharks along with the smoothhounds this year. Next year we're having a dusky shark update. ICAT has changed its schedule since our advisory panel meeting, so they've moved short fin mako into 2017 and poor beagle down in 2019. That might change again when they have their meeting starting next week. But that's what we have on schedule right now, and we're still working on figuring out 2018, where we know we definitely want to do Atlantic blacktip, and we're looking at ways of trying to figure out how to assess sandbar shark at the same time. So we really want to do both of those. And at the moment, the small coastals are not on the schedule.
Rob O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess my question would be on the timing or the opening. And, for the aggregated category, January 1 is the date. I know you probably had it on that map because I didn't run up there to look close enough, but I've seen the map before. And, the rule's there. And so, I'll have to let you know that previously at the board meeting, and for 2 years, we had later opening dates, as you know. I think it was June 1, followed by July 1, if I'm not mistaken. And last time we deliberated this at the commission, we had again asked for that midsummer opening. One reason, of course, in Virginia, we have that closure from May 15th to July 15th. It would be very difficult for me, without going back further than 2013, which I have data in front of me, to really know whether January 1, to the degree it's disadvantaged Virginia fishermen, which is a state waters fisherman. However, I would like your comments on something that I read last week and had in front of me a moment ago, but I think there was sort of a representation that opening in January 1 of 2013 provided 9 months of a fishery, and opening later in 2014 allowed 6 months of that fishery for the aggregated sharks. So I'm wondering, was there an analysis of the proportions that were landed by state by month, so that, and maybe there were not, but in the future, if we could see that, it might be something that would be important to the ASMFC to follow up on what Bob Beal had indicated previously, which, and I'll read from the minutes for just a second, that if there is a federal opening, we, being the ASMFC, can subdivide that quota to try and spread it out or have the fishing occur differently within the quota period. So I can't really say without knowing what the National Marine Fisheries Service analysis involved, whether that's something that, you know, we can pursue or not. We can certainly try and pursue it, even though there's the January 1 opening. I mean, that's an option that was made available by the ASMFC. But if you could comment on the analysis, because I would imagine it wasn't just as simple as 9 months in one year, 6 months in the other, therefore the 9 months is better, you know, without knowing how it impacted up through the Mid-Atlantic.
Carol?
So you're jumping a little bit ahead. I haven't yet presented the proposed shark specs. Yeah. So I will go through that. In terms of your analysis by state, yes, we do look at that, but a lot of that information from our perspective ends up being confidential on exactly how we looked at it, so we don't have that information specifically available to the public, but we do look at that. Our goal in both Amendment 6 and in our proposed 2016 specs was to try to make it so the large coastal shark fishery was open as long as possible, if possible, the whole year, which I don't think has ever happened since we implemented management. So that is our goal.
Any other Amendment 6 questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll go into, Carol has a presentation for 2016 specifications. Before we begin with that, I'll just give a backdrop as to how this board acted last year. With regards to large coastal sharks, the board decided to open that fishery on July 1st. And with regards to other coastal shark groups, small coastal, hammerhead, pelagic, and blacknose, the board opted to move with consistent openings with NOAA fisheries for 2015. So that was the motions that were passed at the annual meeting last year. So as we go through the specifications presentation, we can follow through with some similar motions. The board can choose to approve the final rule when it is published. Comment had closed the middle of September on it, waiting for the final rule to come out. The board may decide to wait on a decision until February. Staff is willing to support an electronic vote for the board when the specifications become available and distribute that information, or the board can do something, setting an opening date for a portion of it and wait to approve other specs when they are released. Not constrained by any of those ideas, but that's just what the board's done in the past, and some ideas that the staff had for some proposed actions as you're listening to Carol's presentation for 2016 specs. I'll turn it back over to Carol.
Thank you again. So, if you want to go to the next slide. For our proposed specs, as we already heard, the punchline's already done. We proposed opening all shark management groups on January 1, 2016. This is a change than from what we've done in the past with large coastals. We are also proposing to open it with a retention limit of 45 large coastals other than sandbar sharks per vessel per trip for directed permit holders. Again, this is an increase from what we've had in the past, where it was 36. And adjusting that retention limit as needed throughout the season. And I do have a slide that goes through what we're thinking of. The only adjustment to the quotas is a decrease to the Atlantic blacknose quota. They had an overharvest back in 2012 that was large enough we decided to spread that out over 5 years. Last year, the blacknose quota was again exceeded, and we are proposing to keep that within that same 5-year period, so that overharvest from last year would be adjusted over 3 years. So all of them would be done in the next 3 years. So the next slide has lots of small numbers, I'm sure, for those of you in the back, but these are the base quotas, except for the blacknose sharks. So the next slide goes through what we are thinking of for that in-season action in terms of moving the retention limit up and down. So we would open January 1 with 45 large coastal sharks other than sandbar sharks per vessel per trip. Then when we reached approximately 30% of the quota, we would reduce that retention limit. And we're saying 30% because we close, as all of you know, when we reach or predicting to reach 80% of the quota. That way, if we have late reports, we don't go over the quota, and that has happened, continues to happen all the time. So we do close when we're thinking we're reaching 80%. So 30% is a little less than half. We figured that gives us time to adjust, for everybody else to adjust, still keep the fishery open, have most of the fishery come June, July, whenever we decide to open it. Well, not open it again. We wouldn't necessarily reduce it down to 0, but increase that retention limit back up to 45. Maybe we would increase it higher if there is still a substantial amount of quota left. But the goal, as I said earlier, is to try to keep the fishery open throughout the year if possible. So we may be moving that retention limit again down, up, to try to keep the fishery going as long as possible, reduce dead discards, and provide all fishermen throughout all the regions that opportunity to fish. So that's it on the specs.
Okay, thank you, Carol. So where we're at is any specific questions you have for Carol, and then the board can deliberate on how to move forward, either with a motion today or, again, the idea of waiting till February or something else over email, given that we are pending a final rule on this. No hands. Oh, here we go. We'll start with Rob and then go to Dr. Daniel.
So what a difference a couple of years makes, and this is exactly what Bob Beal had talked about a year ago, I guess, that there could be a progression in the quota amounts, and certainly by adjusting, from 45, it will be very important. I think that achieves more than probably we expected, so that's good. Virginia is not a major shark capital of the world right now, in comparison to some of the larger states like North Carolina and Florida, but nonetheless, just looking at January 1 in previous years, opportunity could be lost at a time when it was important to at least have some ability to harvest sharks. So, I think this is much improved over a couple of years ago.
Dr. Daniel?
Yeah, and I would agree as well, and think that having a bycatch allowance when the season closes is helpful too, to be able to keep 1 or 2 fish. I think that's going to help reduce discard levels. My issue on the start date, with the closure that exists off North Carolina from January through, I can't remember now. It's been so darn long since we talked about it. But what was it, July 30th or June 30th is the closure off North Carolina?
The end of July.
The end of July. So that still hasn't been put in an amendment to resolve that problem off of North Carolina. So certainly I know that you have been working with our fishermen and talking to them. I know y'all have done your best, but the later we can, without hopefully not disadvantaging Virginia, but the later we can open it, when North Carolina's open, the better off we are. So July 1 gives, that's 30 days that we miss because we can't fish in the EEZ off North Carolina until really August 1. So I would appreciate us keeping that in mind for the opening. I guess we can decide, but it's really going to be up to when y'all open, so that we can fish in the EEZ.
So the technical committee did have a chance to review this, and one question they had was, how much time does HMS intend to give with these CRL adjustments?
So that is a hard question to answer. We have not yet done this, so we don't know exactly how it will play out. When we do closure notices, as soon as we have those updated landings, we get to work on that notice, and we send it out pretty much within a day or two. So that's all the notice we have. I'm hoping we'll have a little bit more notice on these change of retention limits. We might need more discussion. So I can't promise much more than a couple days' notice. They would go into effect 5 days after filing. So.
Pat Augustine?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think there's any more information you're going to be able to give us, are you, is there, Carol? I think this is it.
Unless you have more questions, yes.
No, I have no more questions, but when you're ready, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion.
All right, let's go ahead and start that process.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the board approve the 2016 coastal shark specifications as presented today.
And Megan's working on putting that up for us. And while she's working on that, do I have a second to that? Seconded by Bill Adler. Will give us a chance to get that up for a moment, then we'll come back to you, Pat, just a moment. Let me let Ashton and staff provide some comment about the motion as it is first before we turn it back to the board.
Thank you. Just one comment is that the wording says, as shown today, so NOAA is receiving comments on the proposed specifications, and if there are changes that they move forward with, we would not be in sync with NOAA if we were to move forward with ones.
Change the language accordingly then, to fit our need.
So again, where the challenge lies right now is that we have a proposed rule, the comment period is ended, but the final rule may be different. So with this motion as it is, would set the specs as they exist in the proposed rule, and should they change, then that would likely require further action by this board. Again, in the past and last year, the motion was to defer to the regulations that they would be consistent with the final rule when published. But the motion as it's written right now says move that the board oppose the coastal shark specifications, and you want to stop it right there. And
let's change it the way it was. So we will end up including the changes in the final rule that we will be accepting. Thank you very much for that. And then a question back to Carol when we can, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so let's be clear on the motion that has come before the board. The motion from Mr. Augustine is move the board approve the coastal shark specifications, including changes in the final rule. And is that the motion that you're seconding, Mr. Adler?
That is correct.
Okay, so that is the motion before the board. I'll first go to Pat, and then I'll come back to Dave Borden.
Thank you. Carol, will our advisory panel address the possible movement back to July 1st, or is that foregone conclusion, or will the staff end up making that decision directly?
So the next, are you talking about the HMS advisory panel?
Yes.
So that advisory panel won't be meeting until March, April timeframe. The final specifications will be out in probably another month, maybe a little less.
I was referring to in the future. It'll be addressed for next year. It could possibly be brought up in April for next year. So they may want to move it from January 1st to July 1st. Is that true? Or could?
You can always bring up that idea in front of the advisory panel. We were hoping with Amendment 6 that we wouldn't necessarily be doing that anymore, but a lot of that will depend upon how this works this coming year.
Thank you.
Okay, next up I had Dave Borden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not totally opposed to the motion, but my preference would be to go back to the original motion that Pat and Bill made. I think it's a wiser course of action and provides the flexibility for the commission in the event there is a change to offer comments. And what I would suggest is if they were willing to go back to their original motion, we simply state that when the rule comes out, if the committee feels a need to comment on it, they're designated to do that on behalf of the commission. That's all. Thank you.
So at this point, we've got a motion that we're debating. I don't think there's going to be any more comment to submit with the public comment period closed. So I don't think there's going to be any additional opportunity for comment at this time. And if you would like to propose an amendment to the motion as it is right now that we're debating, that would be the course of action we'd follow.
Yeah. Maybe, Mr. Chairman, I'm not interpreting, maybe Carol can straighten me out on this. My understanding is there's going to be a final rule, and the final rule could be different than the existing proposal. And so all I was suggesting is give us some flexibility to respond to that. That's all, Mr. Chairman. I'll defer to Pat and Bill. I'd ask them to make a friendly amendment back to the original one. Thank you.
I believe that it's the intent, and I think the motion would specify that any changes to the final rule, the specs that we approve would include those changes. And that was the intent of the motion, as I heard it, was to include any changes in the final rule. So essentially, the end result will be the board approving the same specs as the final rule. Let me go to Rob O'Reilly next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And certainly, as I mentioned, there is an improvement. Virginia did comment on the proposed rule on September 15th, and I'll make that letter available as soon as we wrap up here. And it's really a letter that is similar to what was provided in 2014, and I share Dave Borden's points on the fact that we still need to see the final rule, and I'm not positive. Usually that means there's a comment period after that as well. And despite despite the recent years not making much of a difference, whether in Virginia, whether it's January 1 or whether it's July 1, that's just 2 years. And so the points that were raised in the letter that we submitted were that we have a very short window of opportunity given the May 15th to July 15th closure, and also that we certainly recognize that the National Marine Fisheries Service can adjust the in-season, as was talked about here by Carol just a little while ago. But that also can mean, if it's not done correctly, that by the time the adjustment is made, it's too late. So, and I know there'd be good intentions and the best ability. Carol was asked just a few moments ago about what the protocol would be for notification that the technical committee had, and indicated this is the first time out of the chute. Very difficult to comment on that, but as an experiment, we just don't want it to go wrong. We'd like to hope it succeeds, but would like to wait and have our option open a little bit. July 1 is still the preferred opening date and has been for 2 years, and the minutes will show that Dr. Daniel and I made that pretty clear last year. So, you know, again, I will say that we are not a major shark harvesting state, but it is very important at the time that those sharks are available and before they leave in October, that we have the ability to have some harvest. So I don't know what that does to the motion, but those are my comments.
Well, it doesn't do anything to the motion right now. Tony?
Just a question and clarification for the maker of the motion and the board. I just want to make sure that we're clear on sort of at least what's in the proposed rule right now that we're potentially voting on while we don't know what comes out of the final rule. It's that we're looking at a opening date of January 1 for large coastal sharks and a variable retention limit of 45 sharks per vessel per trip, with a maximum of 52 or 54? 55 sharks and a minimum of 0 sharks. And I want to make sure that the states do truly have the ability to respond quickly to variable retention limits before we take action on this motion, because if states don't have the ability to actually respond to those variable retention limits, then we wouldn't be able to implement our own measure. And then Carol did go over a change in quota for the black-nose shark. We typically don't do quotas at the commission. We usually just follow the federal quotas, so I don't know if that means that you're asking for us to do a quota or not, since we don't have the things listed up on the board.
So let me first turn to Carol for clarification on the black nose quota, and then I'll turn it back to board comment on the ability to implement the variable retention limits.
My understanding is in your FMP, you don't set the quotas, you just follow ours, but I did want to provide what they would be for you.
Okay, so staff is looking for input from the board on the ability to implement the variable retention limits. Got Tom Baum, Steve Hines.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, I was going to bring up that concern as far as New Jersey's concerned. We are concerned that we probably might not be able to keep up with the, HMS's changes to a retention limit. So that is a concern.
Steve Hines.
I think New York, with a regulatory change, within at some point in the next year would be able to do that. But we're going to have to change our regulations to get that ability to vary the trip limit. Right now, our regulations state that the trip limit, the possession limit is, 36 sharks, and I'd have to remove that and add language that would allow us to do that. So that's going to probably take us 4 months to do that. So we won't be ready to go by January 1st, but at some point next year, we would be able to go.
Jay McNamee?
Yeah, Rhode Island does have the ability. We would need a minimum of 48 hours, though. That's kind of our rule, and it sounds like that would, fit the scenario that you outlined. The other question I had, though, is on how we get notified, and I'm assuming it's through the same mechanism we have now with the notices we get through email and sometimes fax. But that might be good to standardize exactly how that's gonna happen as well, so we know what to look for.
Well, I'll let you answer.
So we do have different options we can do. So yes, we have the email list that would go out to everybody. I also make sure to contact Ashton with anything. And then we have another running list of people that we need to contact for certain actions. So we call them directly to make sure that they got the information. If ASMFC wants, they could put together a list of who in the states we should call for changes on the retention limit, and we can make sure to call them when we are changing the retention limit, and possibly as soon as it files, so you would know as soon as possible that it's happening.
Dr. Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, I can do mine immediately through proclamation authority, so I don't have a problem there. I'm concerned about the motion, though, including changes in the final rule that we don't know what they are yet. So that just says, that makes me nervous, and I can't support that part of the motion. But talking to Virginia and Florida, I think and I'm not sure if any other states would want to comment on this, but I think we're consensus of the three major shark players to open July 15 instead of July 1. And so I think I would like to make a motion for the large coastal sharks, once this is dispensed of, to open on July the 15th instead of July 1. That way Virginia gets to start as soon as their closure goes off on July 15th. We still got to wait 2 weeks for August 1, but at least it's not a month. And January 1 is still open, January 1 for Florida. Still manage it the same way you've been doing it, but just hold off on opening the summer season until July 15.
Question from Carol for Dr. Daniel.
So just so I'm clear on what you're saying, when you're saying open July 15th, you actually mean increase the retention limit back to 45?
Yeah, the 45, yes.
Thank you.
Go back to 45 from whatever you lower it down to throttle back, which is a great opportunity. So, but July 15 would be far better for us than July 1, and I think it would satisfy everybody, July 15.
So I think we're at a point where we need to either take action by voting on the motion or need another motion to amend or substitute, but I think we're at that point of taking some action here. I saw, did Pat's hand go up, and then I'll come back to Dr. Daniel.
Just clarification, Carol. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Assume that the final rule is different and you implement it. What are the sequence of events that then happen? Are we individually, by states, found out of compliance? Are dealers found out of compliance? Are permitted shark fishermen found out of compliance? At the end of the day, what would we, ASMFC, this board, have to do to come back into compliance? Either accept the final rule, or will you amend the final rule? I don't think so. So could you give the board some clarification as to what the scenario might be if we, the board, does not agree with the final rule? I know some of them don't.
Carol?
So if I understand the question correctly, you're asking what would happen if we finalize our rule and it's different than the proposed. what would happen to state fishermen who are then following the ASMFC regs?
Yes, I know the answer, but someone else needs to know it around the table.
So once our rule is final, federal fishermen and federal permitted dealers need to abide by that. So they would be limited by it. If it is a state fisherman fishing in state waters, that is up to the states, so that they would have to follow the ASMFC regs.
And if the quota is reached by your numbers, what happens?
And then we close when the quota is reached. And my understanding is under ASMFC regs, ASMFC also closes.
Thank you. I rest my case. I would move the question.
Got two other hands, Dr. Daniel and then Mike Luisi.
Well, I was hoping you were going to withdraw the motion, but so I'll amend I'll try an amendment here. I would move to amend that the board agree to the small coastal shark specifications as outlined, and all other large coastal shark specifications with a July 15 increase to 45 sharks. So that, and my intent there would be that would do exactly what we did last year, Adam, as you pointed out, which was very helpful on the small coastal sharks. And on large coastal sharks, we're agreeing with everything that NMFS has proposed. We're just requesting the July 15th opening date as opposed to the July 1. And that keeps 30% in January for the Florida fishery. All the other things stay the same, just the July 15th specification.
And with that motion, what is your intention with regards to, are we approving the proposed rule, or are we approving the final rule when it becomes published? Last year, for the other coastal shark groups, including the small coastals, the board agreed to be consistent with NOAA fisheries when that final rule was published. So you have here, as outlined, I think the board would need clarity as to whether that means the proposed rule or whether that means the final rule when published.
I think we're not going to really have a choice with our federal permit holders not to comply with the federal rules. So I would say the final rule.
So would you like to leave your language as outlined in the final rule? Was that?
That's fine.
Do I have a second for that motion? Okay, Rob O'Reilly. Let me go to Mike Luisi, who had his hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to speak to the original motion. I thought I heard earlier that this final rule was going to be final in a month's time, which I just don't like the idea of voting on a final rule that I'm not sure what that specification is going to be. It's likely going to be the same as the proposed rule. I hope that there would be some indication, Carol, that if you were thinking that something would change, I know you can't say for sure, it's likely going to be the same. But I don't like voting it on the final rule unless I know what it is. So I just wonder, I thought I heard earlier that there's an opportunity here that we could wait for that final rule and do this via email. Take a vote via email in December sometime, which would give states still an opportunity to, see the final rule, make a decision. I certainly will support the July 15th increase. I think that's a good compromise for North Carolina, given that they have to keep the state waters closed until the end of the month. So I'm just asking that of you, Mr. Chairman, if that's a direction that we could consider here, instead of taking motion or voting on a motion where we don't know what the final rule is going to be. Thanks.
So the direction we're going to go is we have an original motion We have an amended motion. I'm going to ask for a show of hands of people that want to speak on the amended motion, and we're going to proceed with voting these up or down. And if the will of the board is to delay action on this to an email vote or something, then the course of action would be to vote against these actions, get them dispensed with as quickly as possible, and then move in another direction. So let me ask for a show of hands. Carol has something to say, and then we'll get back to comments on the motions.
So I just wanted to address the point about whether or not the proposed rule would be the same as the final. We received a lot of comments on this proposed rule. It's a new thing that we're proposing to do in terms of the moving the retention limits up and down. Opening January 1 has always, or in very recent years, been a very controversial action. So we have gotten a lot of comments. Some of these comments are very similar to what we received on Amendment 6 in terms of the retention limit. On Amendment 6, people felt that the 55 shark retention limit was too high, and this included some of the fishermen. We received similar comments on this, that people thought opening January 1 with 45 was too high. They suggested reducing it. Some reduced it down to 25, others reduced it back down to 36. The January 1 opening, we did have some people saying yes and other people saying no, it should be in July as you've done in the past. So I cannot, as you already noted, I can't tell you that it will change. I'm just letting you know that there were a number of substantial comments that could change what we proposed.
Okay, so let me get a show of hands. I'll just also offer that procedurally speaking, we could go one additional layer. So if the desire was to delay action to some point, a motion to substitute for what we have here with that would be an option procedurally. So a show of hands of people that want to speak on the motion to amend. I have two. Dr. Daniel. Eric wants to speak. All right. Eric, Dr. Daniel, and then Rob O'Reilly.
I'm going to have to oppose this because it's against my principles to vote on something that I really don't know what it's going to be. And I don't think it is in a positive light for this commission to forego a comment on the final rule once it actually comes out. If we vote on this, we have essentially we've given up our right to comment on whatever the final rule may be, and I don't care for that. So I would oppose both of these. Perhaps maybe we should table the whole thing until the final rule is made public and then vote, whether it's by electronic media or snail mail, for all I care about, but I can't support either one of these.
Dr. Daniel?
Yeah, I think there may be a little bit of confusion. The request that we're making is not to open, we're asking for the EEZ to open on July the 15th. All right, just to make sure that's clear. It's not for a state waters fishery to open July 15th. It's to make sure that the EEZ opens on the 15th. But Mike and Eric's comments, I agree. And I personally, I'm going to withdraw my amended motion with the hope that we have something that would delay this until we see the final rule, and then we can make a decision based on an email poll or whatever. But I'm not going to. I agree with what they're saying, so I'm withdrawing my amended motion.
I think given the amount of discussion we've had already, we need to dispense with it. Rob?
I had a question. I did second the motion, but what sticks with me is that we don't even know yet about July 15th. So in a way, this is going to be turning out to be a comment on the final rule, the way it's going, because we don't know. NIMFs may or may not want to be ramping up the the number of sharks to 45. We don't even know that. So I like the intent of this, but again, we can go ahead and vote on it.
Okay, seeing no other hands, I think I know the direction we're going. I'll give you a moment to caucus, and we're going to vote on the motion to amend that the board agree to the small coastal shark specifications as outlined in the final rule and large coastal shark specifications with a July 15th increase to 45 sharks, motion by Dr. Daniel and seconded by Mr. O'Reilly. Okay, just as another point of information, when we get to the final action, which the motion to amend is not, this is a final action, and unless we have a motion without objection, that will require a roll call, but the motion to amend itself is not the final action, so we'll vote on this via show of hands. So, all those in favor, raise your right hand, please. All those opposed, same sign. Twelve. Abstentions? One abstention. Null votes? Motion fails, 0 in favor, 12 against, 1 abstention, null votes. Okay, so that brings us back to the main motion. Mike Luisi.
Mr. Chairman, I move to table the motion to an email vote after the final rule is published.
Okay, so we have a motion to move to table until after the final rule is published. First hand I saw was Pat Gear for a second. Any further discussion on the motion? There's no discussion on a motion to table. We have a first and a second. I'll give you a moment to caucus. The motion is moved to table for an email vote until after the final rule is published. Motion by Mr. Luisi, seconded by Mr. Gear. Okay, on the motion to table, all those in favor, raise your right hand. Thirteen in favor. All those opposed? Abstentions? No votes? Okay, motion to table passes 13 to 0 to 0 to 0. Dr. Daniel.
Carol, would it help? I mean, we've kind of provided our opinion on the 15th, and the final rule's going to come out, I guess, with the 15th on it, right? If right. But would it help? Would it help if we were to provide that, or is our comments around the table? Would a motion asking NIMS to do July 15th be of help?
So the comment period's already closed. I believe July 15th was in your comments, Louis. So it is on the public record, and I certainly heard it very loud and clear here. So I don't think we need anything else.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, seeing that, did you have any other comments? No?
I just had a quick question on whether or not the board wanted to put together a list of state contacts for my staff to contact when we change the retention limits up or down.
So I think that's something that staff can work with commissioners to compile, and all those commissioners that have names pass it on to staff or let people know that staff's collecting that. Okay. Is there any further business to come before the board? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Augustine, second by Mr. Adler. Without objection, we are adjourned.
I think we'll go almost straight into Spiny Dogfish as soon as we can get reset.